Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we are back with a special interview featuring creators of Blood of Zeus, Charley and Vlas Parlapanides, here for, we've already had our sort of episode talking about our first impressions and discussing season 2, but now we get to hear it straight from the oracle's mouth, such as it is. But Charley, Vlas, welcome. So glad to have you back on the show.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having us back. We always love listening to your guys' take on things, and it's our pleasure to be here.
It adds a whole extra layers when we're watching, like, as I'm watching the show, like, I know Charley and Vlas are listening to this, and I know we're going to be talking about this, which, like, gets into this whole, like, you know, what is it? The observer's paradox kind of situation. But yeah.
Yeah, that was actually one of my first questions was, I listened to our first coverage of season 1, and I forgot that we had all just decided we were in a conversation with you guys in that episode and be like, oh yeah, they're totally listening to us. And then like a week later, you reached out and you've come on our podcast. You spoke at my class before, which was really amazing experience for my students. And I've seen over the last few years just how engaged you are with your fan base, which I don't see from a lot of other creators. So why is that so important to you guys?
That's Charley, and he does a great job with that. And it really helps because it's always important for us too. And we embrace this as writers, to say, to listen. I think as a writer, you have to be someone who listens. And we try to do that. And, we're Greek and we talk with our hands and we talk a lot too. So we have become mindful to listen. And that's, something that's very important. And Charley does that. And he does a great job with, the social media platforms. And it actually spills into Hades, because one of the things that almost everyone to the T had said, please don't make Hades this evil bad guy, this mustache twirling bad guy, the way he's been depicted oftentimes in media. So we listened and we also agreed we didn't want to see that Hades. He's not the devil. And so, part of it is just we appreciate the fans. There is no Blood of Zeus without the fans. And so it helps with regards to that. And I think it also helps make a better show. And all of you make a better show because we know we're going to be talking to you. And we're like, oh no, what are they going to say? They're going to say, wait a second.
I was going to say, we had to binge Spartacus recently, and that was very hard to binge. And then so when Blood of Zeus season 2 came out, and I'm like, well, I just cranked through that so fast and so happily in comparison.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We do it because, again, like Vlas said, our show doesn't exist without the fans. And so we're appreciative of that. We get to do something we love because of the people that watch. And then, to be honest, we just have a great deal of respect for you guys. In Greek culture, and especially Greek American culture, they always stress there's like 3 noble professions: doctor, lawyer, or teacher. And that you guys are professors, and then that you teach the classics, which often dips into, the antiquities of Greece and Rome. We just have the utmost respect for the 3 of you and what you do. So that's why, like, this was one of the first podcasts. I'm like, oh, these people are awesome. Like, yeah, I want to watch this. They all have PhDs. Great. This will be awesome.
It's all Philotimo, which you guys name checked on the show. So,
Bravo, Colin, you're going to do just fine. You're going to do just fine in Greece this summer.
Efkaristopoli, Imeste Phili. I'm trying to get better at it, but we'll see.
Great.
I was kind of going to come in with one of Christy's questions, just that like season 2 is coming to us a good chunk after season 1. So I, for one, really appreciated the extended flashback in episode 1. Was that kind of always the plan, or did that kind of come about because of the time difference between season 1 and 2?
No, unfortunately, Elijah, I jokingly say we're a lot like the Olympics. We come around every 4 years.
Right.
That was not the intention at all. There's so many gods in the pantheon that we want to kind of highlight, and we didn't get a chance to. And so we always said, like, we finished writing the show like a year before season 1 came out. And because as we were watching the animatics, we were just getting more and more excited. Vlas and I kind of started this document that we would pass back and forth and be like, and this was crazy to do because there's no guarantee we would ever see a season 2, but we would just jot down ideas and share things. And we said it'd be so cool if we come back for season 2 and we see that while this war for Olympus was going on, here's what some of the other gods were doing. And this is actually, if Hades had we'd always liked the idea, he was described in some texts as being kind of like lonely, and that he kind of felt like, some poets describe him as being very wealthy and that he has all these vast realms, but that he had felt cheated by how the worlds were divided. And so we said, that'd be a great way to because what we wanted to do, and this is maybe us, we're crazy, is that now when shows get canceled, if it doesn't feel like a complete story, because they live on streaming platforms, to me, it's like picking up a book and you're like halfway through and then it's all blank pages the rest of the way. You're like, what happened? So we've always said, like, we want to make it feel close-ended, or if we know we have more to go, just leave a thread we can pull, but at least make it feel like the story has been completed. Wherever it is, whether it's at 1, 3, 5 seasons, we want it to feel like a complete story. So that was by design, but it also helped. It was not by design, but it also helped orient people after this long layoff.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I loved that. Yeah.
Thank you. But also too, just to be 100% honest with all of you, is that span of time hurt us, and the old moguls of the studio, system back in the day, like if they had a hit, they would ramp up to try to get a sequel out quickly because they knew audiences get fickle. They just do, even if they love something, if you wait too long. So that did hurt us. Charlie's better at explaining like what the delay was. We had written the scripts, on time, very quickly. That wasn't it. If you can go into the whole COVID of it all, bro.
Well, there's a couple things that, what ended up happening is that, I know 2020 and 2021 probably feel like a very long time ago. But like we forget sometimes what the reality of that world was like. All live action production had basically stopped, and all of our friends in the live action space were out of work, and everyone was trying to do animation because this is this genre that is growing exponentially, and the marketplace for it is growing because now someone who maybe 30 years ago as a 30 or 40-year-old would never watch a cartoon, now they will because they've grown up playing video games and watching cartoons.
And you can do it remotely. You can do it remotely. That's the other big part of it.
Literally, like Powerhouse and Netflix were getting calls from networks saying, like, we had this like live action show. We have these 10 scripts. Can you animate them? Like, it was like just crazy. And so every studio was booked. And so we couldn't find someone to handle the overseas animation.
Okay.
And so it was just brutal. We were just like, we were just like a ship without a port. We couldn't find a place to land.
It was a massive log jam of, shows. And then we were back of the line just by chance of where we ended up, where season 1 ended. So it just took a long time. And we say that because, God willing, there won't be that much time between season 2 and God willing season 3. It'll be within a year and a half. Yeah. Another 4 years.
It'll be less than a year. It'll be less than.
Yeah. Did any of the strikes impact the show at all either? Because I know that was really big the last couple of years.
It did because we weren't able to, attend mixes and be involved in post-production. It was literally like one thing after the other. And I know sometimes, we could do a deep dive, but I don't know how interested you guys are or how interested the audience is. But, we initially, like the first hurdle that we hit was we lost our season 1 director, which really sucked. But he got offered the world to go to DreamWorks and do Kung Fu Panda. And, and it's hard to say, no. So then we went because season 1, we did the boards here in America. Once we lost Sean, then it's like, well, are we going to try and replicate that same model and do that? Are we going to do it overseas? Then there wasn't people available overseas. And then it was one thing after then the strikes and then this and then that. Yeah. And it was just brutal. We were dying. Vlas and I were dying, to be honest, because we're like, this should not take that long.
And we wanted to share the story that we always believed in the story. And we also, too, just from Charlie being on social media, the fans were asking. So we wanted to, we get it. We wanted to kind of have something for them.
You kept reassuring us. We're like, we're waiting. It was so worth the wait.
So much fun.
Literally, fans would, message me on Twitter and Instagram, be like, this show's canceled. Why are you posting fake news that they're, I'm like, no,
Oh
dude, every
no.
day I get up, we
Mhm.
work on this, we're reviewing boards, we're watching animatics, like, and that's part of the reason we had told Netflix, we're like, listen, you have to just let the world know that we're still here. And that's why, like, in November of 2023, they released like a little teaser for Geek
The
Week,
geeked,
and
yeah.
just to
Mhm.
be so that it was officially coming from Netflix, because people were telling me all the time, no, that show got canceled, no way it's coming back. And I'm
Mhm.
like, no, believe me, I know.
Oh, ye of little faith. Come on,
Right.
people.
Mhm. I was wondering, was one of the things as we were watching and discussing amongst ourselves, is that season 2, one of the sort of the things we agreed upon was that it feels different from season 1, just in kinds of the scope and direction. And I wanted to ask you too, if this, as the process, right, after season 1, like reviewing it and like trying to move stories in different directions, because there's things, great and small, but it definitely feels like this is a sort of the show. Part of it is maybe the gap, but also like it feels different or fresher, or there's a different sort of approach coming to it. Was that deliberate, or is that just something you found yourselves kind of falling into as you were working on it, and then after the success of season 1?
It's interesting. What were you going to say? Well, how would you say? What would you say?
Well, no. All I would say is it comes down for us, like in terms of process, we really kind of, as Charlie mentioned, we had that document. So we had a North Star. We had like even more than that, we had a bit of a roadmap. And then that got us to about maybe episode 4 or 5. And then we kind of let the characters take us the rest of the way, even though we kind of knew what the end point was going to be. But it's more about like the smaller little steps in between, from the beginning, the middle to the end. And it really starts off with the strong wants of the characters. And it was important for us to define what those wants are. And then again, for us, character is, getting a character, making sure that want's clear, and then how they go about getting that want defines their character. And so it started with that, and then there were some surprises along the way in terms of like the overall feel. For me, it just so happened that this one feels like a little more personal. It's just my interpretation of it. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, because I would also argue season 1 is personal. But we really try to take the time to hone in on the personal and to hone in on the character arcs of Seraphim, of Heron, and of Hades and Persephone and their relationship, and Heron and Seraphim's relationship. So I think some of those things resonated, and maybe that's why it feels a little bit different, because maybe the arcs are a little greater in season 2, but that's open to interpretation.
Colin, you know what I would say? We always said there's like 4 things that are part of the secret sauce for Blood of Zeus. The first is that Greek mythology has this amazing lore, and we knew we wanted to, like, there's so many, in our opinion, and we're super, super biased. So, all that just being completely upfront. But we knew we wanted to get into like Hades and the underworld and the judges. And we just thought like this is too cool, like, to not make that part of the story. So we knew we were going to explore different parts of the world of Greek mythology. Like, we got to use this abundance of riches that we're provided, this amazing sandbox. The second thing is that, directorially, we always said Sean from season 1, he was an amazing director. And what was slightly different this time in season 2, which I think does have an effect on the show, is that the boards weren't done here in America by Powerhouse. They were done overseas. And long story short, that was just like a decision made above our pay grade. And part of what happens is that now we had Korean artists doing it, and they just interpreted the material differently. And they would only do like exactly like whatever the action is we wrote, that's exactly what ended up in the show, like 1-to-1. Whereas like in season 1, you're dealing with Americans that have similar sensibilities, and they'd be like, they would come pitch us, and we would say every meeting, we would say, if you guys have any other ideas, feel free. It doesn't just because we wrote Hades throws his Biden and this guy. If you have a different idea, but they were just like, no, this is very good. We understand, and then just do it. So that was just very different. The direction was a little different. The editing, we lost our editor Greg to Kung Fu Panda as well. He Sean. Now he was able to come back and help us, and we tried to maintain, the aesthetic and style and the cinematic techniques that Greg used. And I think for the most part, like, we kind of were able to maintain continuity there. And then music, which was Paul, which Paul stayed on board, and he he's amazing. We love Paul. He's super talented. But so if you look at those four pieces, we have slightly different story, slightly different, boarding process, and slightly different editorial process. So you kind of got new players in the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a collaborative kind of endeavor, and naturally. Oh.
Yeah, I kind of building off Colin's question and what both of you guys were saying. To me, my big takeaway of like what the season was really promoting was concepts of justice and forgiveness. But what also really came through with Zeus and Hera that I absolutely loved, and I'm really glad you guys went there, was this concept of accountability being an aspect of justice. Mm-hmm. And it brought me to like a question from one of my favorite writers, Bell Hooks, who asked, how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed?
Oh, beautiful.
And
right.
Yeah, amazing writer. And those concepts are very absent from Greek mythology, and the introduction of them into the show is, I think, what really helped it feel fresh in a lot of ways. So I was just curious, like, how are you guys playing with those concepts, and how do you think it speaks to the world we're currently living in? Because I think it's very applicable.
Real softball question down the middle.
No, softball.
That's a PhD level question. That's why we love this show. This is not some small idle talk here. It's absolutely right. And to your point, if you were to truly stay true to the era of Greek mythology and that period, there was only like retribution. It was very kind of what we would consider Old Testament. And like, okay, this is what you've done. Now you have to do these labors to redeem yourself. And this is your penance. But there wasn't like this understanding and compassion and this idea of forgiveness. And part of it is, I remember, and Vlas always, quotes this, Quentin Tarantino said, like, whatever you're living in your life, that into your work. And I'm like, what does he mean? What does he talk about? Now, this is me just, as a young writer, not understanding, but seeing the world and all this animus and division and like, we're so quick to just like, first of all, everyone will tell you they're a good person, which like drives me crazy. Like, like it is not a sub.
I'm not a good
person. But this idea, everything's become subjective and there's no longer objective points of view. And it's like, don't tell me you're a good person. Like, show me you're a good person. What do you do? What are your acts? And then also sometimes you can do something that's not right, but that doesn't mean to me that you're meant to be, verboten and written off. And so we felt we were just talking about these, half the day, we probably drive our wives crazy. Like Vlas and I are just talking about like the world and things that we think are interesting, but then it all finds its way into the show. And when we were talking about, well, what is it like for these judges to judge and how would they judge it? And we brought more of a 21st century point of view than what would be true to someone from the ancient world, if that makes sense.
And Charlie spearheaded that, to be honest. He's the one that kind of said, okay, there's a clear delineation. Forgiveness wasn't part of really, or, not the way we understand it today. And he had said like, well, what if Gaia comes to the gods and says like, I want to introduce them to this concept of forgiveness. I'm like, bro, I don't know. I don't know if people are going to get that. It's like, I don't know. And he's like, just let me try. And then he wrote it. And honestly, out of everything we've written, it's the thing I was most excited to share. He wrote that. And it's the thing that I love the most. And what I was most excited to share with the world because of everything that's going on. I feel like we need more forgiveness. And you're right though. What a beautiful, quote you just shared with us. It's important to also hold people accountable. And that's very important. And by the same token too, to forge ahead, the greatest thing that exists is love. And to really get to that place of love, we do have to be able to forgive ourselves and others. And I do believe it's truly the only way we can move forward, because if we don't, then we can destroy each other. And I think throughout history, there have been instances where people, they couldn't let go. They let that emotion, they let their anger, the hubris, all these revenge, kind of take over. And that leads to a bad place. And so, yes, I'm glad that you recognize it. I'm glad that you recognize too that it wasn't part necessarily of the ancient, Greek mythological world, and it is something that's more modern. And we did it, and I'm glad we did it because we all feel, I think Charlie and I feel that the world can use more of that. So I'm glad that resonated, and it seems to have resonated with people, and we're proud of that. People mention that, so that always feels good.
Yeah. And I would say this is really where the show to me is at its strongest. Like the episode with Zeus on trial is like the most, to me, was the most interesting part of it. Cause in the one hand was rooted in sort of the story, both that you had written and the sort of playground of myths you're working in, but also was a very kind of forward thinking sort of impression, even kind of approach to this whole, and even just like the sort of sincerity of the show, right? Where a lot of media today, I feel like falls towards cynicism. Yeah. That it's nice, refreshing. I think there is absolutely an appetite these days for like sincerity in media.
Definitely.
Well said. And because that sincerity and it has to be earned. Yes. And I think that's the tricky part. And sometimes like we talk about it, it's like it's easy to criticize, and we have another little saying that we use: "Don't bitch, pitch." Come up with something. It's just like it's easy. It's not that it's easy to be cynical, but it's a little bit easier, I think, than to try to be earnest and try to be sincere.
Or try to solve a problem.
Solve a problem, because, we're all in the arena. You're in the arena. We're in the Hollywood arena. And we're just trying to make the best of it. And sometimes we fail, and sometimes we get stabbed, and sometimes we lash out and, in a bad, non-forgiving kind of way. But we're all in the struggle. And we just try to do the best we can. And sometimes we fail and sometimes we succeed. And if we can just do it in a way, I feel that it's earned and it's not preachy. That's always the goal.
Colin, can I add two quick things? There's a great quote from the Wachowskis where they say, sometimes with writing, sometimes you slay the dragon and sometimes the dragon slays you. And I've told this to my wife, and sometimes I'll come up, we have an office down here and I'll be out of it. She's like, tough day. I was like, yeah, today the dragon slayed us. And then she knows. She doesn't have to. She gets it. It was a rough day. Yeah. And then the other thing is that, I do think it's important that our business gets back to entertaining people. People need to escape. They need to come out of a movie or show and be inspired. Now, listen, we've had 100 years of TV and movies, and you can't be predictable. You can't be overly earnest. It can't be the white hat hero versus the black hat villain, because like we've seen too much of that. But give me Top Gun Maverick. Like I could give me that all day long. Like there's time, and listen, there's times where I like to see a good challenging movie or a good challenging show, but there's other times I just want to have fun. Like the way the world has been the past like decade, just entertain us. And I think our business has to to get back to that even more so. And that's what we want with Blood of Zeus. Like in the end, we just want people to watch the show and have fun.
Sure. Yeah.
But if we can say something nice too and inspire them, then, all the better, as long as it's under the construct. And what Charlie said too, for us, there really aren't villains. Like, I mean, someone could say, well, hey, but it's like, you know what, like you understand why he's doing it. And it just all goes back to, what theme do we explore? And part of what we explore with him is that I feel all of us would try to do everything in our power to protect our family, and that we would protect those that we love, and that we would do everything in our power to help them and try to prevent any suffering that they're enduring. But then the question becomes, how much would you sacrifice? And then another question is, how far would you go? And then another question is, how far is too far? And that's when you go into the tragic realm. But I think that makes them relatable.
Absolutely.
And so we love, when you can present that, with a character that you wouldn't like normally think is, he's a little bit in the gray.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was, when you said like the black hat and the white hat characters, I was always thinking of Hades, right? Because he's such a gray character. And so I wanted to ask you guys about the whole Persephone and Hades relationship. And I really loved how much agency Persephone had in this story, and like the obvious love between the two of them. It's such a great version of their relationship. And so, what went into discussing, their family is really like their big motivation in so much of this.
And a quick side note, Zoe also wanted to let you know that she really loved what you did with her story. So
that's great. That's
Oh,
great.
thank you.
Tell her thank you. That's awesome. You know, Elijah, it's just kind of interesting. You just there was a very valuable lesson we got from Immortals, and I'll never forget it. That was a movie we were, rewritten by a bunch of people. But one day we were in Montreal while they were filming, and I was talking to Luke Evans. And I go, Luke, how you doing? He's like, oh, mate, I'm great. I'm great. I had a great conversation with John Hurt, and he's helping me so much. I'm like, oh, great. What did he say? And he goes, I was asking him, how should I play Zeus? And he goes, well, don't think of him as Zeus, as the king of the gods, as this like Olympian, all powerful Olympian. Think of him as a father, as a ruler, as a lawgiver, and think like what choices go into playing those aspects of who he is, and just play those. And so part of it is like when we look at characters now, and when we read through some of like the ancient texts, we said, well, Demeter, because her daughter, she lost her for 6 months, she made the whole world suffer. And so like, well, what does that say? Does that action say? It doesn't sound like she's like happy, like, oh, this is a great husband for my daughter, even though it's my brother, which is weird and incestual. And we don't get into it. We try not to like mention that. This is all kind of like Targaryen incest. Yeah. But she's kind of angry and spiteful about this. And so, well, then what kind of mother is she? Because she's not happy for her daughter. And then you start to look at, well, we didn't want to do that. She got kidnapped, even though there's like famous paintings about that. And to say that she was kidnapped is even like the PG version of the story. And we said also too, like we had such a toxic relationship between Zeus and Hera. Why don't we make them the antithesis of this? And what if they were really in love? And then Vlas had the idea is that, well, what if instead of that Hades kidnapped her, it was just Demeter who said that because she was upset and she was bad-mouthing her son-in-law. And so that ended up, we said, no, this can be a love story. And we just kept thinking of them as like the Underwoods in the first season or two of House of Cards, where they work together and they plot together and they back each other up. And so that then became the choice for them as a couple.
And also, too, what was cool, and one of the things that we realized, again, listening to the fans from season 1, it was interesting in that there are people that really knew their mythology, and so they were able to like, they recognized the tips of the hat. So, as Charley mentioned, we didn't want the relationship between Hades and Persephone to be one that started off in this place where he kidnapped her and raped her or whatever. We didn't want that. But that's in some of the stories. So we wanted to tip the hat a little bit. Well, how did that come into being? Oh, well, Demeter made it up. She made it up because she was really angry. So if you're someone that is familiar with mythology, you're like, oh, that's where that bit of the story came from. And if you don't know anything about the story, like, oh yeah, this is what the relationship was, So it's knowing what's in the mythological tale and then spinning it in some ways, changing things a little bit here and there, while trying overall to stay true to the spirit of the mythological tales.
Yeah. I love that.
One of the things we talked about, and this has been kind of a constant theme for season 1 and season 2, is that Heron, is the protagonist, and in season 2 he ends up kind of being your messenger of forgiveness, making him a Jesus figure in a lot of ways, especially with his death at the very end. And I imagine a resurrection is not far behind.
Don't spoil anything.
I'm assuming here. But at the same time, we just kind of end up, it makes him boring, and everyone loves Seraphim. And I like that you guys had like Hades pointing out, it's like, I let the Bident bond to you so that you could slay men who are evil, but he's being judged for just slaying anyone, right? And I was wondering if you guys have frustrations about Heron as a good, still struggling with, he's struggling to forgive his brother for everything that's happened. But I imagine he just kind of comes off boring for a lot of the audience. And I wanted to be critical about that myself, like finding him boring, because there's very few real positive male figures. Like I have a nephew who's a 1.5 years, and I'm like, eventually I want him to watch something and take away really good, important qualities. And why are all of our men so flawed in media? Because is hard.
It's well said. And we always look at, the story in the collective whole. We do distill it down to the characters too, but it's also, is this working as a collective whole? And I think that part of what makes Seraphim so interesting, obviously his backstory, and we can empathize with him, but it's Heron having that bouncing board
position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're a diode, right? Like they inform one another.
Exactly. If you look at Star Wars, well, Han Solo is so much cooler and more fun than Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker, in my opinion, is the more boring. It's the harder role to play. But when you put them together, all of a sudden you have a really cool story. So for me, with Heron and with Seraphim, I'm not comparing them, obviously to that, awesome, great movie, but it's similar in that together they make the collective whole work. And so that's a big part of it. And you know what? Like, there's a lot of Heron that we can, that's personal to us. We were, sons of immigrants. Our first language was Greek. We grew up very poor. There were times where we felt like we were outsiders. We just did. And even, and so we wanted to dramatize what it felt like to be an outsider, and the quintessential outsider for us was Heron, a bastard, someone that was ostracized. So for us, there's a personal connection to him, but I do understand the criticism of him, like coming off as being a little vanilla and maybe not quite as interesting as Seraphim. But I also do think, as you said, he is a positive role model. We explored anger in season 1, and Seraphim was not able to let go of his anger, and that led to his downfall. Hera wasn't able really to let go of her anger, and what we want to do with her is that it's going to bring her to a new awareness. She's going to grow on a character level. And Heron was able to let go of his anger, and in doing so, he's able to tap into the divine and then overcome the adversity he's pitted against. So there were people that said, you know what, that character helped me because I'm someone that's stubborn. I'm someone that's angry. I saw how he gave up his anger and it led to better things for him. And that was inspiring. So for that reason alone, I'm glad that the character exists.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting point you raised, Christy, because for us, he's always been more Luke Skywalker than Jesus. But it's interesting that
I can see that. Yeah.
There's a lot of parents I speak to, and I always ask them, they'll say, oh, my kids love the show. And even an old coworker of mine, she's like, my son just saw the first 2 seasons and he loves Heron. Heron's his favorite. And so for the younger kids, I mean, I guess we all see it. We are more cynical and jaded. We've consumed lots of books and media. And so he just seems like the hero with 1,000 faces. And it's like, oh, we know this guy. And he is the more vanilla character. And I get that. It's a completely fair criticism. Part of it is like, we love those stories. Vlas and I, we're suckers for it. And it is the juxtaposition between him and the world. I almost think the only way you can do it, Christy, to have more of a noble character be the hero is you have to go full Game of Thrones Ned Stark, where he is laudable, but the world is so corrupt, and that he gets punished for being honorable. And that's the only way you sell it without it feeling overly earnest.
I was going to say Seraphim has the added benefit of Elastu voice that I think also really gives it, that extra fan appeal.
So good.
Yes. That's also true.
He's great.
I think I saw the interview of him and Heron's voice actor.
Derek Phillips.
Yeah, that was fun watching them talking about when Elias went in for Seraphim. He's like, oh, I don't stand a chance.
Oh, that's cool that you saw that. They're both great guys. Ned Stark, though, too, that is a character that I love. We love Game of Thrones, but I think Charlie's right. I guess you do have to put him in a really kind of dark world because I don't feel in any way that he's weak or anything. And that's a good example of someone that's actually noble and is always trying to do the right thing, who comes off as strong and very likable.
But you have to put him through the ringer. There's the great honest trailer about Game of Thrones, and they're like, everyone must die related to Ned Stark. His dogs, his wife, his kids, his unborn grandkids. Like, spoiler for Game of Thrones fans, but if you haven't seen it now.
A few years out now. But... Well, and I was going to say one of the only characters that I can think of is Uncle Iroh from Avatar, who is
but he's
a really good, upstanding character and well received.
Yeah, but he's not the lead. He doesn't have to carry
Exactly.
But I was going to add, even just circling back to what we were talking about with Hades, of this theme you mentioned about when, positive qualities go too far. That is so, I talk like that's what makes Greek tragedy very successful a lot of times, is when the character's flaw is actually a good thing, like wanting to find out the truth or being dedicated to justice or wanting to defend your family members. And then when that comes into conflicts with other things or the world at large, that's where the drama comes from. And in that way, this is the show, in the ways that you're seeing with Hades and with Seraphim or with Heron and their various sort of, as the kind of triangulation or the mirrorings that are happening between these characters. It's very spiritually sort of a piece with, attic drama or what have you.
True. All true. Well said. We should have you speak about the show.
On a sort of lighter note, I wanted to ask, so another thing one of our takeaways from this season was it felt very dense in terms of just like references, allusions, shout outs, call outs, hat tips, things like that. And I sort of got the impression that the suspicion that maybe there was a lot that was left sort of maybe on the cutting room floor, or just you wanted to get to, but you've got 8 episodes, 30 minutes a pop, something like that. So I wanted to ask you if what was there, right, that, you just had to, for the sake of time and editing and cohesion, had to sort of go on the back burner for the time being.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things.
There were a lot of things that were cut. Like, Demeter's, there were more scenes with Demeter and Persephone to like further define that relationship. That got cut, sadly. That one was those were hard scenes to lose, because especially, both the actresses were great. The performances were great. There was even more,
And it kind of painted Demeter just kind of more one note. We had a couple in 202 and 203, bro. Those scenes, like, it's funny. I was thinking I was going to ask production if they could give us the animatics, even so if we could post them. But in the end, it is what it is. Like, you have to be judged on what the final show is.
But those scenes were hard to lose. There was even a little more, like, you see Demeter come in, with the torch. There was more of like that backstory, like that torch can lead you to whoever you're looking for. And then she had to deal with Hecate. And that was also something that, we want to set up for season 3.
Even little character moments, like, we had a sequence where Hera went to Hephaestus saying, "Can you forge me an arm? I don't want to come to the wedding, without an arm." But we couldn't fit that in.
We asked for that in our episode. I know we did.
And we had written. It was written, and
just, not here, but on the slide. Just let us know which Netflix executive we got to go, storm their palace or whatever.
With all our power and influence.
Right, all 5 of us. There are dozens of us. Dozens.
We have 300 followers. We can make it happen.
That's all you need.
But that was a big one. That one really hurt because, their relationship was let's say, complicated relationship. And it's about, again, for us, Hera starts at a place, we talked about like that new awareness that she's going to get, and we wanted to humble her a little bit. And that scene encapsulated a lot of that. That one was really hard to drop. The scenes that dropped, they were character moments, and they were with other gods too. I'm trying to remember what else, but there was quite a bit that we had to cut, and it was hard. It was hard to cut. We talked about this. We mentioned even the first time we all spoke together, the hardest part of writing the show is that you have 20 pages, 22, that's it. And you have Seraphim and Heron and like, they're the focus in many ways this season, Hades and Persephone. So you have to make sure you give them their beats. And then, you want to try to get as much as you can for the other gods too, but you're literally restricted with the real estate that you're given. And that's the 22 pages, 20 pages. So there were things that were cut out. Absolutely. Even the Gaia bit, and Heron, there was stuff between Heron and Alexia that related to Gaia. We had some scenes there that were more insightful and gave a little more context to his inner turmoil and his guilt. And that got cut too. So that was a challenge.
I will say one of our favorite Heron scenes was when he sees one of the men who had gone and attacked his mother, And then he's really grappling with that concept of forgiveness. And that was one of his most powerful scenes in the season. So I still feel like you guys got that part in there at least.
Thank you. Yeah, we tried to really just say, okay, what are the bare, what do we absolutely need to have, or things, what do we absolutely have to have? And so that was one that we kept. Yeah. And we fought for that one.
Christy, that's why too, though, your students should know they should always be reading as much as possible. That scene, we had written a pilot for Fox called Medal of Honor about Vernon Baker, who was a Buffalo soldier who served and fought the Nazis in Italy. And when he first arrived in Italy, the Italians, they had never seen black men before. They were like closing the doors. They treated them poorly. But when their unit drove the Nazis out of their village, then when they returned, all the villagers embraced them, and now we're throwing flowers at their feet. And he couldn't believe the change that he had saw. And Vlas and I, we were talking about that sequence with Vernon Baker and the Buffalo Soldiers in Italy during World War II. And that definitely colored that scene and inspired that scene for us to include that in the show. So it's just always, everything you do, it stays in your mind and is bubbling back there. But then the reverse is also true. And I'm going to sound like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. And I don't know if this is true with you guys when you write academic papers, but like we wrote season 2 from, November 2020 to June 2021. And since then, we've like moved on and written other scripts and other projects. I have like no memory of writing it. I have no memory of like, if you told me like who wrote this sequence or that sequence, I have no idea. It is gone from my mind.
I don't either. I don't really either. And like, I actually don't care, like who wrote what. Like, I just want it to work. And I'm just grateful that it does. But it is true. Like, I don't remember either.
I was, because I listened to our last interview with you guys today, and I was blown away about just like how much you had figured out season 2. And like at the time they just felt like breadcrumbs, but after watching season 2, I'm like, oh my God, it was there. Wow. So that was really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
We do have a plan, but we'll just see how far the audience will take us and how far we can go,
Yeah. I have a question kind of about audience, because I think one of you mentioned that you listened to our coverage of Percy Jackson on Disney Plus.
My daughter and I, we really enjoyed that show. And I think some people are too tough on that show. It's meant for kids. Like not everything has to be. I love Game of Thrones, but it doesn't have to be. Everything doesn't have to be that.
Yeah, I think that was me being too hard, saying like I was actually frustrated in some ways. I think more with that it's at a middle school level where like can touch on some tough topics, but then don't address it. And so, versus like, when I'm reading, I have like a book of Greek myths for like my little niece and nephew. And it's like, it's very sanitized and it's just a good time. And that's all it's supposed to be. And I think that was my frustration with that series in particular. Is like, you are starting to get into the tough topics, but they're just not fully fleshed out. And that's really frustrating, especially because I didn't grow up with the series. So I don't have the nostalgia aspect.
Oh, interesting.
We're of a generation prior.
So many people in your generation that I honestly believe they only watch Blood of Zeus because they read Percy Jackson. So many people.
It's more Gen Z or late millennials.
Like, we are like just the edge of that.
We like generation.
Just came into
we're the Harry Potter
we are like
group.
the older or the younger Harry. I don't know.
Elder millennials.
But it like just missed us. Yeah, whatever we are.
That's interesting.
But like my students, I taught a myth class this semester, and my students asked me about Blood of Zeus. They were like, "Oh my God, have you seen this thing on Netflix?"
Do you one better?
Yeah, actually, I have.
And then you whip out the recording or the interview, and you're like, "How do you like this? How do you like them apples?"
Bet you weren't expecting this.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
I'm actually way cooler than you think.
See, now you need to invite them to speak to one of your classes now, and then you win all the brownie points.
Yes.
Always happy.
Exactly.
Always
yes.
So I guess my question is like, how do you like animation is so fun. Like as I keep watching more shows and movies, I've always loved animated movies, animated shows. Elijah's not as big a fan,
Wow,
but
put Eli on blast.
she has
No,
a special
crawl
place
under the
for Blood of
desk.
Zeus. And I like that because I think it allows me to be more imaginative, like how I was as a kid and getting to see it, but it's also still very violent and other things. Like it is adult. And I really appreciate that of my myths. So, for you guys, who does feel like your main audience? Who do you really hope this story speaks to?
That's a good question.
It's a good question, because what really helped Blood of Zeus is that the 13-year-old still tuned in. Now, I do think it's like anyone younger than that, I would be like, I don't recommend it. You're too young for this. But it does help, because what Netflix is trying to find is like where the audience lies, what type of stories you can tell. Because the slightly younger audience didn't show up for Blue-Eyed Samurai to the degree they would hope. And that's an amazing show. That's an amazing show.
Really good.
And so, and it's interesting because I was talking to someone about it, and they're like, "Oh, that makes complete sense," because every trailer felt like an art house movie. But I'm like, "That's what made me want to see it." And they go, "Yeah, but for the younger kids." So I do think because Blood of Zeus had that superhero feel, that it speaks to them, and because you really want from 13 to 40 to be the audience, and so it's a fine line how you capture that. Now, like, part of it is like, so Elijah, will you watch the Terminator animated show they're going to do? Like, or is that just like a bridge too far?
I don't know. Maybe.
Don't worry.
Holding out for Lara Croft. I want the Lara
I
Croft.
watched Lara Croft, yes, but I like Terminator movies. We'll see. I like Castlevania.
We
Sounds
love
fun.
Castlevania. We love.
Yeah.
You know what? A lot of my friends are like you, and like one was like, "Man, excuse me, I shouldn't say that," but like,
it's all good.
Oh, you're fine.
Restart it, bro. Just say it again without
No,
cursing.
you can swear all you want.
damn, now I gotta watch this cartoon. I don't want to. What is it? But I'm gonna support. And then he's like, "Dude, it was so good. He was so good. He was just like going like one after the other." And so I had a couple of friends that said they were not into anime at all, or into animated shows, and they loved it. And so for us, that's always like a great compliment. And we tell people, if you're fans of Greek mythology, check it out. And it's interesting when you ask, like, who is the audience? And I think, like, we can't quite say that we're 4-quadrant because of the violence that, like, kind of takes out that one quadrant of, like, younger kids. But the rest of it is a PG-13. It is a Lord of the Rings. It is almost 4-quadrant, but we're telling the story that we want to tell. And so it's always for us. And, Scorsese had said this, when he makes a movie, he makes it for himself. And he hopes that if it moves him emotionally, it'll move others. And we do this the same way with all our collaborators. We just like, okay, what's the story we want to tell? Is this moving us emotionally? And then we hope, if it does, that other people will feel that way. And thank God, it seems that at least with these 2 seasons, that's been the case.
But it's interesting because the demographics are changing. And we kind of briefly touched on this and we talked about it. We grew up, in the 80s and 90s. Like, we had the first NES. So we played video games. We looked forward to Saturday morning cartoons. And so for us, I remember the backsheet Lord of the Rings. I was like totally infatuated with the opening. They did kind of this rotoscope opening. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's just like, I was just like, oh my God, these are incredible. And so again,
we are, bro. It's okay.
It's so true.
But like 50 years ago, like in the 1960s, if you were to go up to a 40-year-old and want to watch a cartoon, they would look at you like you had, 3 eyeballs.
I was going to add, like, part of it is, there's sort of a double-edged sword where, like, there are so many sort of animated shows out these days, but also this is an environment where animation doesn't so much have to overcome. I mean, there still is that lingering stigma of, like, it's for children or it's not to be taken seriously, and then now it's only in the last couple of years, I feel, where it's started to really get the kind of respect that you would have a animated movie up for a Best Picture nomination without any kind of, like, that's would be something that you would just accept and not think of as strange. But yeah.
No, but you're spot on. You're spot on. That's exactly right. It's now more than ever being taken a little more seriously, and people are a little more open to it. There's still the stigma. It's been diminished a bit. It's still there, but now more than ever, people are, a little more welcoming.
And to be honest, it does allow you to do a certain level of storytelling you couldn't do in the live action space unless you're Spielberg or Peter Jackson.
Sure. Yeah, you got James Cameron money to throw around.
Exactly. I'll never forget. We were talking to our good friend Derek Kolstad, who wrote the John Wick movies and Nobody, and I remember him telling us the budget of the 2 episodes of Captain America and Falcon. And I remember thinking the budget for those 2 episodes, you could do 7 seasons of Blood of Zeus. I was like, Derek, this is crazy. He's like, I know. He goes, we never dreamed of having this kind of money on John Wick. And this is what I'm doing on 2 episodes. And so part of it is like, you can just like, Netflix has always just been super supportive. Like they give feedback, but for the most part, they give us freedom. And you would never be allowed to do that with a $250 million movie. You
got to share this James Cameron story. I love this story. You guys are going to love it. This is really funny. So we know Jim G, who was the chairman at Fox at that time, and Jim
Giannopoulos.
Yeah, Jim Giannopoulos, and they screened Titanic for him. So they said, "Oh, Jim was very excited about it," and so he brought Rupert Murdoch there, and they were screening it. And so they watched the movie, and Jim turns to him, and he's like kind of waiting for his reaction, and Murdoch turns to him, he's like, "It's good, but it's not Air Force One." No, it's not. He loved Air Force One. He's like, yeah, it's good. Not Air Force One. It was to make $1 billion.
Because the follow-up question was like, because it's on a boat? Like,
could have used more Harrison Ford. Like,
it's like, it's like he wasn't as impressed with Titanic as he was with Air Force One. It's just
that's
kind of funny, though.
Yeah, that's so hilarious.
Great. Oh my god.
Well, yeah, kind of speaking of what Colin was talking about, the last decade, it feels like streaming services have really changed how we engage with media, and there's just so much content on there. And I think people, especially our age and older, have really kind of reflected on the fact like there's kind of a loss of community around media because there's just so much that like, I'll mention a show and people are like, what streaming service is that on? I don't have that. Yeah. And like there's just so many misconnections, but at the same time, like you guys, this show released globally and in multiple languages, which is almost unimaginable for an animated show, even just a few years ago. So I guess my question is like, what do you think about those changes and what do you hope to see in the future?
It's a great question, and it's true. And I'm almost curious to hear from all of you, because there are times now it's like where I'm like, gosh, I never even heard of that show. And I think that the streaming services and the studios and the networks, they're more cognizant of that. And so there is a tightening of the belts, and that's challenging in itself.
There's a contraction. There'll be fewer shows.
Yeah.
There certainly will be. And it just, for me, kind of what I've learned is like, man, like, when you have a hit, and we definitely had a hit, try to come out a year and a half, 2 years later. Don't wait for the reason that you just mentioned there. Because 4 years later, almost people they're watching some other show, or they're watching this, and they're middle of something like that, and they vaguely remember that show from 4 years ago. And I think in some ways there are probably too many shows, and I think that it's just going to be a tightening of the belt. I also think there's going to be more consolidation, which we're personally not fans of, meaning that there'll probably even be fewer studios. Let's see what happens with Paramount. Let's see what happens, with Warner's. And for me personally, because we grew up, watching just movies and being thrilled to go to the movie theater. I would hate to see a Paramount, no longer exist, but it's already happened to Fox. Fox, got bought up by Disney. And, my father-in-law, had mentioned to me, because at one time there were over 1,000 car companies. And I was like, really? And then it came down to just fewer and fewer and fewer, and 3. So I think there's going to be consolidation. And I think there are also going to be fewer shows and
how they release the shows, Christy, because that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Now I remember one time a Netflix exec saying, our biggest competition isn't other streamers, it's sleep. because we
God.
want people to keep binging
Yeah.
and keep watching
Mhm.
but there's part of it though, you lose that ability to have a conversation when you drop everything all at one time. And I know like Disney a better job of, releasing shows, weekly. And I do think it allows you to have a conversation because you watch a great episode, you read articles about it during the week, you talk to your friends about it, you say, hey, what do you think might happen next week? That kind of appointment television, I think, is lost when you make everything available and you drop a whole season at once.
Yeah.
So it's, to be honest, I think people are figuring it out and the audience is figuring it out and people in our business are trying to figure it out. But part of this all goes back to bring it all back to Greek mythology. Like we tell stories, people used to sit around a campfire and tell a story and you wanted that communal experience. And so sometimes just, sitting down and just watching it all by yourself, or there'd be times I'm watching something, my wife's falling asleep, she'll be like, what happened? Or Maestro in Blue was a perfect example. Like we were working on Blood of Zeus, we were writing the scripts, and I had watched it with my wife and daughter, and because it was like a Greek themed story, we were all into it. And then like I had to go back to work, and I came back, and they watched the rest of the season without me. I'm like, guys, come on, like this was our thing, like and so that loss of community and discussing the story and anticipating together, I'm trying to think for you, because for us, like I remember, bro, like The Sopranos, and everyone will be talking about like what happened, and did you see this episode this weekend?
Yep.
What do you think? Are they really going to whack so and so?
I would say that's kind of one of the last shows really like that, I think, at least in my living memory.
Yeah, the other
For
big
sure.
one, my other big memory is like midnight showing screenings of, the newest movie, usually Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or something. You line up and like that just doesn't happen anymore.
Why doesn't it happen with the movies? Like that's so true. I remember that. Like why doesn't it happen with movies anymore?
You know why they stopped it?
COVID?
Bro? No. They kept getting more and more leery if the numbers were bad, because it used to be truly at midnight you would walk in and see the movie. But then if a movie underperformed, it would make them nervous and they're not going to do well, and everyone's reading the numbers right away. So then they expanded it out to like 9 p.m. You could go see the opening night was 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. on Thursday. So they did it to kind of insulate themselves from failure, but in a way they kind of devalued the experience,
I agree. I'm curious, all of you, would you have rather, in terms of your consumption for, say, Blood of Zeus, would you rather have seen like one episode at a time, a week apart, or are you glad that you got all of them at once?
I go back and forth on this all the time.
I know. Yeah. What I love is like how bite-sized those episodes are. So it does feel really fun and I can keep going, and it's kind of like eating chips. Once you like eat one, you just kind of want to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think it works so well, and it's so much fun to do that. But I love some of those, like cliffhanger episodes where it would be so fun. I would like call it and be like, what? Like,
and you make predictions, right?
Yeah.
Like what's going to happen next. And I will say I watched it as soon as possible, and I'm the one doing our social media on Instagram. So like I was the one taking pictures of my cat, watching Hecate speak and things like that.
That was
and
awesome.
Then watching your guys' stories at the same time to see all of these people at the same time engaging with the media. That was as close as I've gotten to it in a long time, and really enjoyed that experience.
So you like, and it seems like you both are leaning towards give it to me all at once.
I think with this,
I'm happy either way.
I would be happy either way.
Yeah. Either way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I do think for like the premium, and not to like in any way like segregate shows, but like I know like, bro, we like watching House of the Dragon. Know it, Sunday night. We're going to see like for the really kind of premium varsity level shows. I like when they space them out. Christy, that just jogged my mind. We had a scene where we had her cat and we cut it out. Bro. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And
yes. That was
that was a bummer. Now that bums me out because you mentioned that as a cat.
I think it was too hard. It was like one too many things. It was like, that's right. We did that.
It was like a note from somebody, like, do we need to see all these cats like around? And someone
They,
like,
they
all
are
right,
such
just don't worry.
majestic creatures. You can't really capture them that easily.
No, it might have been something about animating. Oh my God,
Yeah,
I think
it
that's
was
what it was.
animation.
And they asked, is it important? I said, no, it's not important, but it's just it's like reference. And they said, is it okay if we drop it? And we said, yeah, go ahead, just drop it. That's it.
That was a mistake.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was also going to say I'm very primed to wait a week for animation because we subscribe to Crunchyroll and I have so many anime.
Exactly.
I'm
That's
very
how
used
they
to
do it.
Yeah. And their audience is huge for many of those shows. So like I think you all could pull that off pretty easily.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
and to be honest, animation needs it more so than even live action, because like when the gap between finishing episode 1 and episode 8 is like months. But if you're rolling, it would just get the shows out sooner, which, would only help in my opinion.
Very true.
Yeah, so I guess we can get to some of the fun bits. Like watching it was in terms of like, as always, you guys have the best Easter eggs.
This was going to be my final question because I wanted to talk about this specifically.
Well, I have a different question too. Then, so maybe we'll save that for last. Hang on, sorry, I wrote all the questions down. So like, so in this one, maybe you can't speak to, but we keep hearing little whispers about a possible Medusa project down the line. And I want to call out a moment in episode 1 of season 2 where Athena and Alexia exchange this look and they're like, don't worry, we're going to do something cool later down the line. And they go off on both go on their grand adventures. And I'm like, can you guys speak to any future projects along that line? Or you gotta
no, I mean, it just comes down to viewership. We have a really cool way to tell an awesome epic Medusa story. It's one that we're dying to do. Yeah. And it just comes down to numbers. I mean, and so I just hope people watch this season because it's really about this season. I think that, well, at least that's what we were told. If we get the eyeballs for this season, then that could lead to a spinoff of the Medusa pilot that they have that they love, Netflix.
We wrote a pilot and they bought it for us, and what Athena is in that show is what Zeus and the old man were in season 1 of Blood of Zeus, where she is the mentor. And our whole take on it was that we didn't like that. Basically, Gorgo was punished because the temple got desecrated and she was attacked, and like that's not a great reaction from Athena. So instead, our take on it was that this terrible thing happens. The temple is desecrated. Gorgo is attacked. Athena demands justice, but Zeus, Poseidon do nothing. And so she says, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you the power where you can transform into the Gorgon, and you will have this power to go get revenge for yourself. And I'll help you along the way. And we're going to show these guys what's what. And so there's a bunch of little things that are seeded in the show but it's just a question of, like Vlas said, like, will we be able to go there? Will we get the viewership but it would be so cool. It would be so
and
cool.
in that version too, because we also really love Poseidon. Poseidon's going to have a son, and maybe the son did
Atlas, who was the ruler of Atlantis.
And maybe the son,
not Atlas from the underworld.
Maybe the son did something, to Gorgo the priestess, and then the father took on that thing because he knew if he didn't, Zeus would kill his son for what he did. And then, so then that's why in mythology, it's known as Poseidon did this awful thing. Well, maybe what if he didn't really do it? What if he was doing it to kind of take the blame off his son, to give his son a second chance? And what if it's like a road to perdition type relationship that Newman has with Daniel Craig? So anyway, we'll see.
And the idea is that to get revenge, she's going to have to go to Atlantis, and so that's the
really cool story. It's told from a cool perspective, but we'll see. And
I got one of my friends together and I were drinking wine one night talking about Medusa because I was very frustrated with Medusa's storyline in Percy Jackson. They made improvements to it, but I was still frustrated with it. And like,
That's fair.
there's this really popular subgenre in manga right now, which is the isekai, but it's the villainess. And it's the idea of like the villainess has lived her life and she has a very bad end. And then she goes back in time and she's like reincarnated 5 years into her same body, but with all the knowledge of what happened to lead up to her death. And so she makes different choices to like avoid that outcome. And it's a really weird specific genre. I'm like, a Medusa villainous isekai would be so good.
So I was going to say I was thinking of this as kind of the final wrap up question, but before I get to that, is there anything that anyone wanted to either ask or get out there that hasn't happened already?
I love Hestia. I love that she's a badass. It's so cool.
We commented she looks like Azula. She's flying through the air.
She's like a firebender.
It's so good.
I love it so much.
And how awesome is the music Paul gave when she's flying away?
I was like, much fun.
That was so much fun.
I was going to ask all of you, like, what was your I'm just curious, your favorite, thing about season 2, character or moment, scene, whatever.
Specifically, I really liked the 3 judges. Everything, all the scenes involving them with the judging, like the Zeus on trial especially, but also the one with Seraphim as well. Radamanthus, Naiacus, and Minos. And then the minute they come up, and then like even the little
you guys knew who they were though.
Yes,
because I think most people had no idea.
Yeah, I mean they're like, and the little nod, we're like, oh yeah, Zeus. Also, you are our dad. Which is worth noting, which adds this other layer to the whole trial. But
okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, the Demeter and Hades backstory, also getting the nice little cameo of Zagreus and Illinois, which it feels like you guys are speaking to a lot of other popular media, because it's like it's hard not to connect that to the game Hades. Whether that was intentional or not.
My daughter and I played the hell out of Hades during COVID. And we absolutely love that. And I was like, oh no. And Zagreus, the name Zagreus literally means like the pitfall traps in Greek, and he was a god of the hunt, and I was like, we just have to get them in there, and then it just worked out great. I didn't know in Hades too, we call her Melly because Melly in modern Greek is honey.
Yeah.
And we thought, oh, that's a cute pet name for them to have for her. But I didn't know she was going to be the main, character in Hades too. I'm like, oh, this is even better. Like, great. But that 100% that came from COVID and my daughter and I playing Hades way, way, way too much.
So good. Yeah.
So, and then the other myth, well, like there's 2 myth. I love the myth Easter egg moments. So, Apollo refusing to take the discus.
Oh, right.
Exactly. Oh my God.
We're in the funeral game.
That was good.
That's right. So you got that. See, like you guys are smart.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I wonder like how many people got that.
We should do one of those like game show type things where they just put it in front of us and see if we can like catch them all or whatever.
The Seraphim going to the Carites and calling himself nobody.
So good.
That was great.
You have to know your Greek mythology, but that with the Cyclops, exactly. It's a great reference.
And then there's one other moment that I wanted to confirm with you guys. It's Electra in the underworld, and she's in Elysium, and she's running her hand through the grain that Persephone has done. That's Gladiator, right?
100%. 100%.
Okay.
But that speaks to the point of like when we said to the Korean animators, this is like Gladiator, like this moment that should be. But then they give us exactly. And I was like, we might get sued for this, but it's the right idea.
Go that picture up with the music, and the song is literally called Elysium by Gladiator. I'm like, this just has to be it. Like, it's gotta be.
Yeah.
A good trivia question, but this is not your guys' sphere of expertise. We stole Seraphim's punishment in the underworld from
that's Odin
mythology.
and Loki. Sorry.
Wasn't even like a millisecond.
The minute I saw it, I'm like, wait a minute. Like,
we were trying to think of a good one, and then we're like, well, what are some cool ones? And like, oh, well, that was cool, and let's just do that. So.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I think, and then, oh no, keep going, Christy.
I was going to say, archaeologically, the call out for the Keramakos and Diplon Gate.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It is one of my favorite museums in Athens, like, by far.
We're going to take my wife and I are going to take our daughter there this summer.
So fun.
That's why this is so fun, because like no one gets it. No one else gets that. No one. Like you guys got like all of them. Like, it's really cool.
Well, I doubt that, but thank you.
We try real hard. Yeah. We're like, must find them all, like Pokemon. Gotta catch them all.
I think one of my favorite parts about this season was just Persephone and Hades' love story, and just how they like have just a real actual connection and like hanging out with each other. I really loved that take on their story, and that was definitely a highlight for me. But also that like a lot of our female gods are just all complete badasses. Like Persephone just could, was like fighting Ares and Hestia, and like they're all so cool, and they don't necessarily like have to be that like super powered, but I love that they were.
That's cool.
Listen, Greeks love strong women. That's in our culture. Oh, yeah. And we know strong women, and like Gaia goes full Greek, but part of it is like when we talk about these stories, think about it. Like her husband was awful. She had to help her son murder her husband. Then like her son starts off as a good king, but then he becomes a tyrant and he locks all her other children up. And then he's eating his own children. So she has to help her grandson. Like, if you think of that as just like a story, you'd be like, this is the most tragic, but that was Greek mythology. And so she's trying to steer them in the right direction. But then also, too, at some point, she's like, enough, guys.
I'd love to do like a live action version of like a young Zeus and see how Zeus becomes Zeus. And Gaia, the central figure, because she's really kind of torn from so many different, as Charlie mentioned, that's a person that's in dilemma. And, there's a screenwriter friend that really talks about that. Like, most interesting characters are in some sort of dilemma, and the dilemma of having the dilemma that she's in specifically is just interesting. It's interesting. And to see how Zeus becomes Zeus, I think would be really cool. Because he's flawed too, man. He's flawed. He's not perfect, as we all saw in the judges.
And that's Christy said, like with your niece and nephew, you give them the very PG version. It's like, oh, he has lightning bolts. Like, that's how we were first introduced to him. Like, how cool that's the coolest guy ever. He can throw lightning, but then you grow up and you're like, ooh, that's not so good. That's not so good.
Yeah.
That's not so good.
Yeah. Yep. Colin, what was your favorite?
He said it was the
Oh, you did. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. You're right. The judges.
Yeah, the judges.
And the discus, you reminded me of that. I think the discus might have, that got an audible, from me.
It was so good.
But actually, I was going to ask Charlie and Vlas, did you have a favorite where you got in there and you're like,
oh, good question.
My favorite is something that Charlie wrote. It's the forgiveness. I was excited when that kind of, came together. And the other thing that I would say in just terms of favorite, I love how it built to a singular moment of where it ends, so you have the forgiveness, and then you have Hades, and you have that moment where he just takes things, a step too far, and it's just tragedy and tragic. Yet we understand why he did what he did, and he went too far, and just, how it all culminates to our ending. I was proud of that.
Yeah. A wonderful cliffhanger. I hate it.
I know. It's like, I hate it so much. It's so good.
I knew the name that was coming. I'm like, yes, say it.
Two things I'll say. The one thing I will say, someone on like Twitter said, like, oh my God, like, I hope this doesn't mean like there's going to be lots of death and destruction. If there's a season 3 and we release Typhon and the Titans, there's going to be death and destruction. Like that, you can't get around that.
There.
You go all out war,
I was wondering about Titans, because last time we talked to you guys mentioned Kronos, and there was a moment in the underworld where Hades is flying around, and I noticed a large figure ensconced in ice, and I couldn't figure out if that was Typhon, but he's supposed to be under Mount Etna lava, or if that was someone else that we should be watching for.
There's things that are there that you're like, oh, I'm like, bro, are we overthinking this? Nobody's paying attention. This is stupid. Just like, but then they're also like that if there's things that people say that would be relevant for the following seasons, and you just, you lay them in, and maybe we're wasting our time, or maybe if they go back and watch everything in its entirety, they'll be like, oh, there's that, and there's that, and there's that. The one thing that you said, if there was something we could slip in, we didn't get it in, but we did get it in. Like Vlas and I love Ben-Hur. We watch it every year with our families for Easter, and the chariot chase, like the chariot race in that movie, we love. And we wanted in the games to have a chariot, kind of race. We had to cut it for time, but we had some of the initial boards. We just threw them in the end credits. Because like we've written a couple projects where we have like chariot chases and races, and we've never gotten anything in. But one day we will, God willing, get a chariot sequence in a movie or show.
Not to spoil things, but you mentioned Kronos, and one of what I'll say to that is that we love shows that are about families, and even if there's dysfunction in a family, it just makes it more personal and just elevates the stakes. So that would be an interesting guy to maybe kind of bring back, but we'll see.
Very fun.
Oh, I had one last Easter egg question. Cordyceps, just because, or?
Yeah, it's a little bit of, I play too many video games and The Last of Us, and we were trying to think of like, well, how can we show Demeter? If you like can really control nature, how could you be powerful? And what's powerful in nature? And then there's two things. Then it was during COVID where like that kind of filters in. And then and my daughter in her science class, they were studying it, and I was like, oh yeah, they do use that in The Last of Us. And I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe it'd be cool if Demeter, did this. And so it's one of those things where life and then trying to problem solve and find ways to make her powerful. If you control nature, like how could you mess with people? And so that's where we landed.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun, you guys.
As always.
Thank you so much for talking to us again. I know we want to be really respectful of your time, and we so appreciate the amount that you guys have given to us already.
Thanks, Minnie.
It's the very least we can
Thank you
do.
for having us. You guys, it's just really, thank you for doing the honorable thing and good work as opposed to what we're doing. You're teaching, and influencing young minds, and thank you for that. And thank you for having us. It's been a blast as always.
Of course, if there's anything you want to plug in particular, social media, subreddits, anything like that you want to throw out for their audience to get dialed in on so they can beat the drum for season 3.
I would say just keep watching, keep telling your friends to watch, because, if we get the viewership and then we get Medusa, and that would be really great.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
I would say follow Blood of Zeus on Instagram too, because that's where all the fun kids hang out.
Always.
For sure.
Excellent.
We try and post what we can and make it interesting.
Oh yeah.
Thank you again for listening, everybody. As usual, you can find our podcast on most major streaming services as well as movieswedik.com. Follow us on social media under any variation of @DigMovies. Charlie, Vlas, Karistopoli, thank you so much for being here. It was great having you.
Parakalo, and our pleasure always. Thank you for everything you're doing. Listen to your professor. Go to class, kids. Go to class.
All right. Bye, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.